Within the last few hours, something happened that every major news outlet is covering, and almost all of them are still missing the real story. Iranian missiles hit the center of Tel Aviv. Hezbollah rockets came down at the same time across northern Israel. Sirens went off in more than 20 communities almost simultaneously. Buildings were destroyed. People were wounded. And a region that has been hanging over the edge of full-scale collapse for weeks just lurched one step closer to the abyss. But this is the point that has to be made clearly from the very beginning. What happened today did not begin today. What we are watching now is not some sudden explosion of violence that appeared out of nowhere. It is the predictable, documented, step-by-step result of decisions made weeks and months ago, decisions that were visible, decisions that were warned about, and decisions that much of the mainstream media either minimized when they happened or buried before the consequences arrived. And today, we are going to give you the full picture. Not just the headline, not just the shock, but the actual context that explains how we got here and what it means for where we are going. If you are watching this for the first time and you are not yet part of our community, subscribe right now. Every single day, Monday through Friday, we go live on YouTube and Facebook to break down exactly this kind of story with the depth and the honesty it deserves. Hit that subscribe button, turn on your notifications, and let's get into it. Let's start with what actually happened in the last several hours, because there is already an enormous amount of information circulating online. And as always, in situations like this, not everything being reported is accurate, and not everything accurate is being reported. According to sources from both Israeli and Arab media outlets, Iran launched at least 3 separate waves of missiles beginning around midnight. When we say waves, we are not talking about 3 individual missiles fired and done. We are talking about coordinated barrages, multiple missiles in each wave, timed and targeted with clear operational intent. One of those waves struck the Ramat Aviv district in northern Tel Aviv, and footage circulating on social media showed significant smoke rising above the city skyline. At roughly the same time those missiles were coming down on Israel, Hezbollah launched approximately 200 rockets from Lebanese territory toward communities in northern Israel. 200 rockets in a single morning. Sirens went off in cities including Nahariya and Haifa. Israeli medical services reported, at the time of broadcast, at least 2 people wounded by shrapnel, and 1 residential structure in the community of Moshav Hananiel was completely destroyed. Now, here is the first thing you need to understand about the information landscape surrounding these events. There is a significant information blackout around the real casualty numbers coming out of Israel. This is not speculation or conspiracy theory. It is a documented pattern of behavior that both Israel and the United States have adopted throughout this conflict, minimizing or delaying acknowledgement of their own losses while maximizing coverage of losses on the other side. The strategic logic is clear. Both governments want to project an image of invulnerability, an image that says only the enemy is suffering, only the other side is paying a price, while our side absorbs everything and keeps moving forward. When you understand that dynamic, you understand why you should treat official casualty figures from any party to this conflict with significant skepticism. And while those missiles were falling on Israeli cities, Iran itself was waking up to a devastating bombardment of its own. Reports from Israeli media, and this detail is crucial, confirm that overnight strikes hit the western portions of the Iranian capital and extended to cities including Shiraz, Isfahan, and Kazvin. Mehrabad Airport, located within Tehran itself, was heavily targeted during the night. These are not fringe reports from unreliable sources. These are confirmed by multiple independent outlets. Iran was being bombed at the same moment it was launching its own missiles. This is not a one-sided story. This is a full-spectrum, mutual military engagement, and it is happening right now. Stay with us, because this is where the analysis gets critically important, and it is the part that almost nobody in mainstream media is willing to say clearly. The targets that Israel and the United States struck inside Iran during this latest campaign were not, in any meaningful sense, purely military objectives. In the 24 hours leading up to this morning's escalation, confirmed reports documented strikes against petrochemical facilities, which, while they can have dual-use implications, are not frontline military installations. But far more disturbing are the confirmed reports of strikes against at least 30 Iranian universities. 30 universities. The most recent was the Sharif University of Technology, one of Iran's most prestigious academic institutions, comparable in its national significance to MIT or Caltech. There are also confirmed strikes on hospitals, roads, civilian bridges, and residential areas across multiple Iranian cities. We need to be direct about what this is. Under international humanitarian law, deliberately targeting civilian infrastructure, educational institutions, hospitals, and residential areas constitutes a war crime. That is not an opinion. That is the definition written into the Geneva Conventions and upheld by every international legal body that exists. When you bomb a university with students inside it, you cannot claim it was a military target. When you destroy a hospital, you cannot justify it as collateral damage. When you demolish civilian bridges and roads that serve the general population, you are not conducting a military operation. You are conducting a campaign of terror against a civilian population. That is the accurate legal and moral description of what has been documented in the last 24 hours. And now it is essential to understand the political context in which all of this is happening, because there is a direct line connecting the events of recent weeks to what exploded this morning. Donald Trump issued an ultimatum to Iran using language that was extraordinary, even by the standards of presidential statements in this conflict. The substance of that ultimatum was stark. Open the Strait of Hormuz, or face what was described as the total destruction of your civilian infrastructure. We want to be precise here because this matters legally and morally. Threatening to destroy civilian infrastructure as a coercive tool is itself a violation of international law. It is a war crime to threaten it, regardless of whether the threat is carried out. The ultimatum had a deadline. That deadline expired today. And what we are seeing this morning, the strikes on universities, on petrochemical plants, on roads and bridges, on the communities of ordinary Iranian citizens who have no say in their government's foreign policy, is the partial but already devastating materialization of that threat. Before we continue, if this kind of analysis is what you've been looking for, is where you need to be. We read everything. We challenge everyone. We don't take the Western media line at face value, and we don't take the Iranian or Russian line at face value either. We go where the evidence leads. Subscribe now and join us every day, Monday through Friday. Live on YouTube and Facebook. Now, let's talk about the coordinated nature of what Iran and Hezbollah launched this morning, because this is a strategic development that significantly changes the picture. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps officially described this morning's offensive as a joint integrated operation. Those three words are extraordinarily significant. This is not two separate groups, Iran and Hezbollah, independently deciding to fire rockets on the same morning. This is a coordinated, jointly planned, simultaneously executed military operation involving two distinct armed forces operating under unified command. Iran launched its ballistic missiles from Iranian territory. Hezbollah launched its rockets from Lebanese territory. Both actions happened at the same time against overlapping target sets in a way that was clearly designed to saturate Israeli air defenses simultaneously across multiple vectors. What this tells us is that we are no longer looking at two separate fronts in a regional conflict. We are looking at a unified military alliance that has achieved a level of operational coordination that, frankly, exceeds what many Western analysts were willing to acknowledge was possible. Iran and Hezbollah are operating as a single integrated military force, sharing intelligence, coordinating timing, and executing combined operations designed to overwhelm Israeli defensive systems. That is a qualitative change in the nature of this conflict, and its implications are enormous. While all of this was unfolding, there is a parallel story that has received far too little attention, and it speaks to something deeply important about who is actually paying the price for the political decisions being made at the top. In northern Israeli communities like Kiryat Shmona, which has now been subjected to repeated rocket attacks, local residents are beginning to speak out in terms that are striking in their directness. They are saying that the Israeli government has abandoned them, not that it has failed them, not that it has made mistakes, but it has made a deliberate calculation to pursue a military agenda that serves political objectives while leaving the civilian population of northern Israel to absorb the consequences without adequate protection or even adequate acknowledgement. People who once felt safe in their communities now live under the constant possibility of a rocket coming through their roof. Sirens sounded more than 20 times in various communities in a single morning, and the sentiment being expressed is clear. We did not consent to this war. We are not soldiers. We are civilians. And the government that is supposed to protect us is instead using us as acceptable casualties in a conflict whose purpose we do not understand and whose end we cannot see. This is a dimension of the story that is almost entirely absent from Western media coverage, which tends to present Israel as a unified society with unanimous support for its military operations. The reality on the ground in the communities closest to the fighting is considerably more complicated and considerably more human. Now, let's talk about something that the propaganda machine on the Western side has been pushing very aggressively in recent days, and that deserves a clear, honest response. There is a narrative circulating, amplified by various media outlets, sympathetic to the American and Israeli position that Iran is running out of missiles. The evidence cited for this claim is the observable fact that Iran has launched fewer missiles in this most recent wave than in previous attacks. The interpretation being offered is that Iran's arsenal is depleted, that the military pressure is working, that Iran is weakening. That interpretation is, to put it plainly, wrong. And the reason it is wrong is that it misunderstands the strategic logic driving Iran's current approach. Iran is not launching fewer missiles because it does not have more missiles. Iran is launching fewer missiles because it no longer needs to launch as many to achieve the same result. Here is why. Earlier in this conflict, in order to get a meaningful number of missiles past Israel's air defense systems and actually strike targets, Iran needed to launch much larger salvos. The calculation was simple. If Israeli air defenses can intercept 80% of incoming missiles, then to land 4 missiles on target, you need to fire 20. But Israel's air defense systems have been significantly degraded. The Iron Dome, the David Sling system, the Arrow batteries, all of these systems have been firing interceptors at an extraordinary rate for weeks. And those interceptors are not infinite. They are expensive, they take time to manufacture and replace, and they exist in finite quantities. As those systems have been depleted, Iran's missile penetration rate has improved dramatically. Now, to put 4 missiles on target, Iran may only need to launch 6 or 8. The effect is the same. The cost to Iran is lower, and the cost to Israel and the United States, in terms of expensive interceptor missiles consumed, continues to mount. This is the asymmetric exhaustion trap that serious military analysts, including those at Russian outlet RT, whose analysis on this specific strategic point is worth reading regardless of one's views on that outlet's overall editorial orientation, have been describing in detail. Iran has deliberately structured its campaign around a fundamental economic asymmetry. It costs far more to intercept a threat than to launch one. A Shahed drone costs a few $1,000s. The interceptor missile used to destroy it costs anywhere from $50,000 to over $1 million, depending on which system fires it. Iran does not need to overwhelm American and Israeli defenses with raw numbers. It needs only to sustain a rate of fire that keeps those defense systems continuously consuming their most expensive and hardest to replace components, while Iran's own costs remain manageable. Every interceptor that Israel fires to destroy an Iranian drone is a dollar amount that Israel and the United States have to spend, manufacture, and replace. Iran is not trying to win this conflict in a single overwhelming strike. It is trying to make the conflict so persistently, economically, and militarily costly that the other side eventually concludes that continuing is unsustainable. That is the trap, and the evidence strongly suggests that it is working. There is one more dimension of this conflict that we have to address directly, because it involves something that Western media coverage systematically avoids discussing with the seriousness it deserves: the ongoing situation in Lebanon and what Israel's actual strategic objectives there appear to be. Israel has announced what it describes as a new exclusion zone in Lebanese territory. But if we are going to be honest about what is actually being proposed and what is already being implemented on the ground, we have to acknowledge that what we are seeing in Lebanon follows a pattern that has been visible for decades: the destruction of civilian infrastructure, the displacement of civilian populations, the incremental assertion of military control over territory that previously belonged to another sovereign state, and the declaration that this territory is now a security buffer that can no longer be inhabited by its previous residents. This is the same model that has been applied in Gaza. It is the same model that was applied in the West Bank over decades of settlement expansion, and now it is being applied in southern Lebanon. The mechanism is always the same: destroy the conditions under which people can live, force them to leave, and then declare the vacated territory a security zone. Over time, the security zone becomes permanent. The people who were displaced do not return, and the territory has effectively been absorbed. We are saying this clearly because it needs to be said clearly, and because the euphemistic language of security operations and buffer zones obscures what is actually a systematic process of territorial expansion through forced displacement. That is the honest description of what is documented in the historical record and what the current operations in Lebanon appear to be following. Here is where we are right now. As of this broadcast, Iran and Hezbollah have demonstrated the capability and the willingness to execute coordinated joint military operations against Israeli territory simultaneously from two directions. Israel's air defense systems are under documented and measurable strain, with interception rates declining as interceptor stockpiles are consumed faster than they can be replenished. The United States is facing an asymmetric cost curve in which every dollar Iran spends on offensive systems requires multiple dollars of American and Israeli defensive spending to counter. Civilian populations on all sides of this conflict, in Israel, in Lebanon, and in Iran, are bearing the consequences of decisions made by governments that have chosen military escalation over negotiated resolution. And the region as a whole is closer to a generalized conflagration than it has been at any point in recent memory. What is missing from this picture is not military power. There is no shortage of military power being applied in this region. What is missing is diplomacy. What is missing is mediation. What is missing is any serious, sustained, internationally supported effort to create the conditions for a ceasefire and a political process that addresses the underlying grievances driving this conflict. Instead, ultimatums are being issued, civilian infrastructure is being bombed, and each side is convincing itself that one more escalatory step will produce the breakthrough that all the previous ones failed to achieve. History offers very few examples of conflicts like this, one that ended well through military escalation alone. It offers many examples of conflicts that could have been resolved through political means, but were instead allowed to spiral into catastrophes that harmed everyone, including the parties that believed they were winning. We are not going to tell you what to think about who is right and who is wrong in this conflict. These are genuinely complex questions involving history, law, politics, religion, and human suffering on a scale that resists easy moral categories. What we are going to tell you is what is actually happening, with the sources to back it up and with the analytical framework to understand why it is happening and what it means. That is what I do every single day. If you found this analysis useful, if it gave you context that you weren't getting elsewhere, then share it. Send it to someone who has been trying to understand this conflict, but keeps feeling like the coverage they're seeing isn't giving them the full story. Subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, come find us live on YouTube and Facebook Monday through Friday, because this situation is moving fast, and we are going to be with you every step of the way as it develops. The missiles are still falling. The rockets are still being launched. The decisions that will determine where this goes next are being made right now. and you deserve to understand exactly what those decisions are and what they mean. We'll see you in the next.